Okay, we're actually recording this time. Okay, so we're going to see Weathering with You. I know I haven't put a video on this channel in approximately 14 days to 3 weeks, but we're trying something new today. Got my tickets booked for this new Makoto Shinkai movie. I don't really know much about it. It's very hard to handle 4 things at a time. So I've got this umbrella and this camera going. But kind of excited for the movie. Don't really know what to expect. The last Makoto Shinkai movie I saw was the same one that everyone else saw. And this time, unlike when I went to Promare, I actually got the version that was subbed and not dubbed. So this one should work out a little bit better. We're going to downtown Vancouver to see this. Might get some ramen before. Don't know if I'll put that in this impromptu vlog I'm calling it. But other than that, we'll just check out our impressions of the movie afterwards. So stay tuned. Okay, we saw Weathering with You, and I've walked back almost home, just outside. We're at a park now, and I thought it would be good to get my first impressions down before I head home, because probably while it's freshest in my mind is while I have the most to say about it. So what did I think about Weathering with You? I think if you've watched any other Makoto Shinkai movie, you probably know what you're getting with this. That's not necessarily a bad thing, 5 centimeters per second, your name, all those things. There's a very set formula to how Makoto Shinkai goes about doing his stuff, and it's not necessarily bad. It's more like he just knows what he wants to do, so he just goes ahead and does it. He doesn't really think about if there's other ways that he could be doing things, or if there's a new formula that he needs to try out to maybe go further than he's gone before. I think he's very comfortable with where he's at. And the things that he talks about are kind of repetitious as well. It's not really like he's doing anything fresh, but that's not also a bad thing. Okay, so I know that sounds probably pretty negative, but let's go back to the beginning. So Weathering with You, as with pretty much every other Makoto Shinkai movie, is about the love of 2 young people, and where Your Name, I think, started with high school students. Weathering with You starts with a middle school student and a high school student, and I think one of the most blatant things about this movie versus previous movies is that there's a definite tone change in things. Your Name was, I would say, more positive, and not positive in a kind of we can do it kind of way, although it is kind of like that. But this movie, I think, starts off at a way lower low than anything we saw in Your Name. So Weathering with You starts with a boy who's run away from home, and he moves to Tokyo because he's sick of living on the little island that he lives on. He thinks it's suffocating. And when he does, he sees that, Tokyo is this weird place that's not really meant for people like him. You need a lot of money to live there. And it's not really friendly at all, unlike the place where he comes from, where people are friendly, but they're kind of a little too friendly and they kind of choke you with their friendliness, So that's kind of how we start with this movie. And I think that's probably the most important point about this movie, is that there's a kind of sense of hopelessness. And if you're 20-something in 2020, you know what I'm talking about. You feel this kind of just oppressive hopelessness that always just follows you around. And I think that's basically the core theme of the movie, is this hopelessness, because one of the main points of the movie is that there's a constant rain. And if you look around, just look around, I live in Vancouver, so I know what gray skies feel like. You take a lot of vitamin D supplements when you can. That's basically what gray skies are. And it's a Tokyo that's always raining. There's never any sun. And the main character's love interest, don't ask me about the names, I don't know names. She's this person who brings sunshine into other people's lives, right? That's kind of her operating thing. And as soon as I saw the rain, as soon as I saw the sunshine, I was like, for sure, this is definitely a movie about climate change. And at the end, they showed a little interview with him, and it definitely was a movie about climate change, which I think we're going to see a lot more of these going forward. And the tone of the movie is also very different from Your Name, because Your Name is also about an ecological disaster, but the tone of Your Name was all about how such a thing could be prevented through human action. And Weathering with You is not like that at all. Weathering with You is a lot more negative about things like this. In Weathering with You, there's a definite struggle against the lack of agency that you feel in the 21st century. And I think one of the main songs on the soundtrack is, Can Love Still Accomplish Anything? And this is something that we hear a lot about in like news and things like that, is, are things that we valued previously still valuable? Do they still have meaning? And the operating, like the moving plot of this movie has to do with the main character boy convincing the girl to use her sunshine powers to not have to work at a club or whatever. And I think that's also important because it kind of signifies like the capitalistic intent of when you have something good, you kind of want to just sell it to people. But the alternative is not too good for her if she chose to do something else. So she ends up doing it, and it doesn't really end well. And I feel like I'm rambling here. I think the point is, with this movie, is you kind of go into it not expecting too much, because this isn't going to be like your enthusiastic hurrah kind of studio trigger movie like Promare, where things just end up being grandiose and larger than life. And I think that's actually a good thing. I think probably this is my favorite Makoto Shinkai movie, and that's, for me, that's not really saying too much, because I'm not the biggest Makoto Shinkai fan. I liked Your Name a little bit, but I wasn't like super convinced by Your Name. But I did like 5 centimeters per second, although I don't know if I would like it as much now if I watched it. And I think Makoto Shinkai is kind of, he said this himself, he's in the interview after the movie, he's kind of convinced that that this climate change thing that's happening now, or I think this is what he's trying to say with this movie, is we're past the point where we can fix it. So spoilers for the end of the movie. At the very end of the movie, something happens, a natural disaster that's irreversible to Tokyo, right? And if you think back to Your Name, there was this giant meteor collision, and they were able to prevent that through their action. But in this case, it's actually the reverse. The character chooses to embrace the natural disaster to save the one that he loves. It's like a reverse choice of what we saw in Your Name. And I think that's significant because it kind of means that we have to accept the reality of what's coming, because there's no longer a world where we can change it anymore, you know? And I think that's going to be the message moving forward, because in 2020 things look really bleak. And I think what Shinkai was trying to say with this movie is, even if things are bleak, it's better to embrace the bleakness with people that you care about than be alone in a world that's perfect. And the people in the Shinkai at the end, they showed like a cut of interviews that he did before this movie for like promotion or stuff, I guess. And he was talking about how people kind of blamed him for the choice that the main character makes. He chooses to let Tokyo suffer its fate and still be with the one he loves. And Shinkai kind of said, you know, like this choice that he makes. And to me, it seemed like there really wasn't much of a choice, you know? Like the choice was more like, do you want to do something unnatural again? Like the feeling is that the climate change that we've created, and there's references to it in the movie. At the very end, he's reading this article that's called The Anthropocene, Embracing the New Geological Condition or something like that. And I think that was pretty much a reference to the whole climate change, man-made climate change thing. And I think him choosing the natural disaster rather than having everything be fine and be without people is kind of like Shinkai's nod to us, the audience, to be like, there's no world where you can just have everything go back to normal. That's not really going to happen anymore. You kind of just have to embrace what's coming and just hold close to people you love and try to live through it, because the natural disasters in this movie are kind of really shocking. Like, the flooding is insane, and you don't really think of flooding when you think of climate change. You think of like drought and things like that, maybe hurricanes, but the flooding is nuts. And it reminds you that no matter how much power we think we have, like, we don't really have as much control over things as we'd like. And I think that's quite important to keep in mind going forward into the 2020s and into the 2030s. What else to say? Oh, there's a cameo from the two characters that are in Your Name, which I saw immediately. And at the end, he was like, in the interview with Shinkai, he said, there's a cameo from the previous characters from Your Name. And it's kind of blatant, but I don't really mind. Like, he's a creator, he can have a shared world, that's up to him. But I thought it was, he said, if you noticed that, I think you're an otaku. And I was like, well, I just got my card from a well-known anime director, so there's that. And then the movie was pretty good. You know, it's classic Shinkai. Like, he mentioned in the interview that he basically collaborated on the movie with Rad Wimps, who did all the songs for the movie. And I think it's fairly obvious at this point that Shinkai makes a lot of his movies in conjunction with the music, because a lot of the like set pieces or emotional beats in the movie are corresponded to with like very emotional kind of J-rock with strings type musical arrangements. And that's also very obvious in this movie. There's obviously nothing wrong with that per se. I just think that it plays into kind of a trope of his that he may or may not want to be associated with. And as with most Makoto Shinkai movies, the first half I think is very straightforward and direct. It gets to the point emotionally, it strikes a chord with you, and then the last half kind of drags out an ending because he has to think of a way to introduce stakes into something that's based purely on personal relationships. Now, you may feel differently about that because you're so attached to the characters because of the first half that the second half of supernatural or cosmic or technological consequences have to come to a conclusion somehow. And I kind of felt more of that in this movie than with Your Name. I think the first half of Your Name is really good in the way that he introduces this premise and then has these characters kind of act out in this world and interact with each other. The meet cute is the best part of Shinkai movies, the interactions between the two characters. And I think he sometimes forgets that he has to end things, or he wishes that he could just make a kind of personal movie, and he forgets that he has to have a giant conclusion to things, or he feels forced to have a giant conclusion to things when he sometimes doesn't want to. And I think that's not really a big problem per se, but it does make the movie feel a little bit kind of maybe not as cohesive as otherwise would be, because the transition from the like everything is all smiles and montages kind of world to the things are happening, bad things are happening, we need to stop them kind of world, I think is a little bit dragging at times. Like, the pacing in the middle of the movie is a little bit tough to watch through, because maybe an hour and 30 minutes in, there's still a half hour to go at that point. I looked at my watch and I was like, okay, what's happening here? We still have a half hour to go. Where's he gonna go with this? And I think it was an okay ending. And as always with pretty much every Shinkai movie, 5 centimeters per second, Your Name, and now this one, there's a drifting apart before the coming together at the end. Like, there's an initial introduction, like a big rising action, the two characters are forced apart somehow, space, time, and in this case the police, and they're forced apart, and then they come back together. Like, that's what shows that their love or bond is strong or whatever. The coming back together part, and that of course happens in this movie as well. If you've seen one Shinkai movie, I feel like you know what the ending is. I think about 15 to 20 minutes into the movie, I knew not exactly the ending. I can't say I knew the exact ending, but I kind of knew where it was going. And I don't think he's trying to hide it at this point, because he kind of knows too that you know about his movies. And he knows that if you have watched any previous ones, which he knows you've watched because Your Name is the most successful anime movie of all time, I think, at this point, that if you've watched that, you'll most likely watch this as well. So he wants to get it out of the way at the very beginning, what's going to happen, I think. And it's an interesting setting. We kind of see the lesser side of Tokyo, and I think that kind of darker side of Tokyo has been of great interest to people recently. There was a show, Kabukicho Sherlock, last season that was set in that red light district, the Kabukicho district. And I think the main character in this movie going to that district when he first comes to Tokyo kind of signifies like what happens to people when they first come to Tokyo. And he mentions the 2020 Olympics in this, I'm pretty sure, which is pretty cool. The middle part of the movie and the beginning, I think, are the strongest bits. The ending, as with Your Name, I thought was a little bit weaker, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It just means that it's not as strong as the beginning and the middle. Do I like this movie? I think yes. It's a pretty good movie. I'd probably recommend you watch it if you like previous Makoto Shinkai movies, because, as I said before, they kind of hit the same beats. And despite knowing that this music, this J-rock is going to cut on whenever there's an emotional beat, when the strings hit, they hit different. So there's really no preventing that. I feel like it's designed to strike an emotional chord with you, whether you want it to or not. Another interesting thing to report is that Masaaki Yuasa is coming up with a movie. I'm like probably maybe not the biggest. There are obviously more diehard fans than me, but I'm like a diehard Yuasa fanboy till the end. Ping Pong is my favorite anime of all time. That's going to be controversial. Discuss that in the comments. But anyway, Masayuki Yuasa is coming up with a new movie, and it got me to thinking, movies are back. Anime movies are back. Miyazaki is on a little break in between there for a little bit, and things got a little bit sketchy, but I think for sure now they're back, because we had Your Name, we had Weathering with You, we had that My Hero Academia movie, we had 3 Psycho Pass movies in Japan. Which never released anywhere. And then I think they made a Psycho Pass season 3 based off that, kind of. And now everyone's just making movies. There's all kinds of movies set up for this year. I don't know exactly off the top of my head. But if Yuasa's making a movie, then you know for sure something's up, because film is always the preferred medium, I think, for animation, just because you get that bigger budget, you get more time, you don't have to animate as much, you can pay more attention to detail. And the amount of rain in this movie proves that pretty much, because no way, in no TV series, could you get away with this kind of rain in any show, because it just takes forever to animate. And we all know what rain looks like in anime. It looks really beautiful and nice, and it rolls off people's cheeks. And that takes time, people. Another thing I want to address, technological innovation, right? So this movie, the closest show I would say it resembles would be Sarazanmai, because it basically looks like the same Sarazanmai art style. But of course with much more detail in the backgrounds, and the camera movements are more smooth, and they do flex a lot with the camera movements in this movie, because I feel like they just had a really big budget after the success of Your Name, and they were like, let's go for it, let's freaking do this thing, and they just did it completely. Tokyo looks amazing, even if it's all in 3D, which of course 3D can look amazing, we do know that, but it doesn't really look ever amazing. So that's that. Weathering with You, pretty good movie. I'm much more excited for the Ride the Wave movie that Yuasa is making now. It looks like the same movie as this one. It feels like a lot of the old school animation, and pretty much every director out there in Japan and elsewhere is really set on making movies that want you to connect with people. Because freaking Kojima did it, and it takes 50 hours to play, and it's called Death Stranding. And when it comes out in the summer, I'll probably play that too. Who knows? Get out there and connect with people, I guess, because one of the main characters of the movie is connected to the sky, and it turned out okay. But in between it was pretty sketchy. So I guess connect with people because nature doesn't like you. Or something is the thesis of this movie. I'm just kidding. Discuss in the comments, tell me I'm horribly wrong. And I'm getting rained on, so I have to get my umbrella, so I'm out of here. Peace.
And now for something completely different.
Okay. So, don't listen to that lame stream, brain clean Kaido from 3 days ago. Pay attention to what I'm going to say now, okay? So, with my fresh impressions of the movie right after, just after I watched it, I wanted to discuss a few things, but I completely forgot to mention one particular thing that I found extremely interesting, but I just didn't think to talk about it at the time, I guess. And that is the problem of agency, right? So agency is like your power to control the outcome of your own situation. It's like having the ability to change something about your life without worrying too much about, the consequences. It's like having the power over your own fate, basically. So in Your Name, I've been contrasting Your Name with Weathering with You this whole time, and I think that's probably the most helpful comparison you can make, is to compare someone's old work to their new work, because it gives you an idea about how their thinking has changed over time. So in Your Name, there's definite control over your own fate, other than the whole point that he gets switched into someone else's body. But there's not really much discussion about how they don't like the fact that they're being forced to do this. They just kind of accept it and roll with it. But in Weathering with You, there's a ton of talk about kind of resenting how society treats you and like bemoaning the fact that you're forced to do this in a world that's becoming more and more crazy. I think at multiple points during the movie, different characters that are not the main characters mention that the youth have it much harder these days than it used to in the past. And I think that's a very direct reference to the fact that current society is like so complicated and messed up that it's hard for any one normal person to navigate through all the little pitfalls that you have to navigate through to be a normal person nowadays. And I think the scene that basically deals with this the most is the scene right before the ending part, when Hodoka ran away from the police when they've been approached on the street with Hina and Nagi, and they're sitting in this hotel room, and he says, "This is enough." That actually probably was the most emotional part of the movie for me. I was just thinking back on it, and it occurred to me that's pretty much all anyone who's 20-something, like going into the adult world right now, wants from life, is just a place where they can be with their loved ones, where they're not forced to do anything that they don't want to do, really, and they're not like denied human dignity for no reason at all. And for him being like, "This is enough for me, I don't want anything more, just please don't take this away from me, let me have this." I didn't cry in the moment, but like thinking back on it now, it's a really emotional, touching moment in the movie. And I just completely forgot to mention that in the first part of this. So I'm out here in the park again. It's still raining. I waited for 3 days for there to be some sunshine so that the positive end to this could be in a sunny place, kind of like relating thematically to the movie, but it's Vancouver, of course, so there's no such luck. And I have to put this video out tomorrow. So here we are. And the whole agency thing, I think, is what takes the movie to the next level for me. And what makes it ultimately that much better than Your Name. Because Your Name, I think, tried to deal with some issues, but either lost its way or just couldn't come to grips with exactly what it was trying to do. And I think Weathering with You does a much better job of that. So from the very beginning, Hodoka has really no choice about what he's going to do. He's always kind of led through things. Not to say that he doesn't make any meaningful choices. He for sure does. He starts the business that eventually leads to Hina's like spirit power or whatever being overused and her turning into a water nymph or whatever the heck she turns into. But I think that there's a certain level of like he's down and out in a way that we can all relate to, and I think that's pretty meaningful. And I think that takes the movie to the, like, elevates the movie past just being a Makoto Shinkai look at the weather or whatever. And I think the analogy or the metaphor of the weather itself kind of ties into this, because I think I talked about this before, but the weather itself is like this metaphor for things we can't control. So the whole movie being about things we can't control, and the weather being the fundamental, like, visual metaphor or thematic, like, motif of the movie, I think definitely ties into that. And it's just one of those things where when you see a movie for the first time, you kind of don't look as deep into it as you maybe should. And then as you think about it more and more, you come to like it more and more. Kind of like the Star Wars prequels, I think. Not comparing this movie to a Star Wars prequel. I think just like people who like world building, like the idea of the movies more than the actual movie. And I think in that sense, the themes and ideas that this movie discusses are more interesting to me than the actual movie. And I'm very, very much looking forward to Shinkai's next movie, if this is his train of thought, because I think this is something that isn't addressed much. And Shinkai is not the oldest guy. He's relatively young compared to the other very famous directors in Japan who are all like in their 50s or even above. I think Shinkai's only like in his early 40s. But I think he's able to like tap into a reality that many other directors either have already outgrown or just isn't a reality for them because they don't see the world that way. Like, if you're a young person in 2020, you see the world as kind of like this thing that no matter what you do, you can't change. And that's kind of like one of the themes of the movie, is that no matter what you do, you can't change something, in the sense that no matter what he does, even if he makes the choice to save Tokyo and lose Hina, it's still a horrible choice for him. And if he chooses to save Hina and lose Tokyo, that's another horrible choice. And one of his mentor in the movie, I forget his name, the mentor guy in the movie, he specifically mentions during one of the scenes that if we can just lose one person and be denied all this change and disaster, then isn't that worth it? And then there's like this quote that says, you save one person, you save all of humanity, or whatever. So I think that was what he was trying to get at there, is that if you have to make the kind of choice that results in the loss of even one person, then you're not doing justice to the kind of system that you want to set up. Things like that. I think this movie does better on rewatch than the first time, and I kind of want to rewatch it again, just to catch more of these little details about the movie that I think are missed the first time. And ultimately, at the end of the day, in a way, I don't think Your Name was as much about this, because in Your Name, the parents and the family are ever present, right? Both main characters, they have their whole family with them. They support them, even if they don't know exactly what's happening. And in that way, I think Your Name was more like a Breakfast Club, or one of those vein of 80s movies where you're from a kind of stable place, but you're looking for something more. And I think Weathering with You is kind of the fundamental opposite of that, in the sense that Weathering with You is like you have nothing, and you're just looking for the barest something, and once you get it, you don't want to lose that. And I think that's the fundamental difference between the two. Tell me in the comments why I'm wrong. I actually think there should be more discussion about this kind of stuff, because I think there's been like this like seismic shift in the way that we view the world around us. Like, I think once upon a time we used to think that things could change and we could carry out positive change in the world. And I think people are kind of starting to realize, if that's the word you want to use, or believe that that's not a possibility. And I think this movie kind of speaks to that feeling. And for the people who feel that way, I think it can feel kind of dismissive or disheartening when people around them believe so fervently that change can happen, despite the fact that nothing ever happens. So for them to be kind of like for them to be acknowledged in a movie like this, I think is kind of important, because even for the people who believe that change is a possibility, I think that even deep down they know that nothing is changing and they're terrified of that. So that's that. I just wanted to add this little PS, this little addendum to the review, because the first part came across as very negative, and I'm not really that negative on this movie. I thought it was a good movie, and probably, as I've said before, the best of Shinkai's work so far. And if this is the trajectory that his career is taking, because believe me, he's not done. Weathering with You is a huge success, and he's definitely going to come out with another movie in a couple of years, so we'll see what happens when he does that. But I hope and I pray that he doesn't go back to his old ways, that he sticks with this trajectory, because I think this is way more interesting to me than anything he's done before. So Shinkai, please make more movies like this. I did like this movie. That's why I harped on it so much. I think it's important to get context in there. That's all I wanted to say. So thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. I won't drop the umbrella this time, and I'll see you in the next one.